back to the realm of history on this Sunday evening. We're getting ready for the final quiz of the year, chapter 33 on the Cold War. So make sure that you're paying attention. Tonight, of course, if you're here, let me know in the comments that you're here. Give me a hello and also like the video so that we can help spread the message. But first of all, I want to get into what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're getting ready for this final quiz. Here's a little bit of the agenda. It's pretty much the same every week. Have a little bit of key advice for you here to start it off. We'll go over some of the key terms. We're not going to be doing key figures tonight. And then we will get into the short answer. I don't have any AP questions for you tomorrow because it's in lieu of the fact that we're going to be doing 2 to 3 practice exams. So I'm going to save you on that. And then at the end, of course, we'll have some question and answer time and a little bit of final advice. So first of all, the key advice for today. Number one, I think it's really important in this last chapter. There's 5 sections. So my advice would be to read through all of your section outlines for chapter 33 very carefully. I would read through it once. I'd read through it twice. This is sort of the message that I've been teaching you all year, utilizing your outlines, making sure that you are focusing on those key terms that you should have underlined in those outlines. That's why we utilize that format. And then second, of course, pray for the right things. I think it's very important right now that you pray for the good Lord's guidance. Don't pray for a good quiz score. Don't pray for victories in soccer or in crew or in golf or whatever sport you're playing right now. But pray for the health and safety of your family and that the good Lord will guide you to use your talents to the fullest, those talents that you've been blessed with. Number 3, you need to be here now. It's more important than ever at this time of year to be here now because things are going to start piling up. I know that in my class, we have the quiz tomorrow. There may be some other quizzes that you're getting ready for. The AP exam is looming. We really have about 11 days left before that exam. So you need to make sure that you're ready. You have final exams in other classes. So you need to be here now and you need to focus your time and effort where it needs to be. And so wherever you're at, make sure you're focused on the task at hand. Number 4, make sure you say thank you to your parents. Make sure that you, before you go to bed tonight, tell them thank you for everything that they do for you. I know personally as a coach and as a teacher, I see how much driving they do and, how much they do for you on a daily basis. So I think that that's really, really my most important message today is that one. And then number 5, if you are feeling stressed and if you do have a lot of exams and you do have a sport that you're playing and, whatever you have going on, you have so many things going on in your life, you need to rise to the occasion and you need to meet the challenge. Don't back down from the challenge, but meet the challenge head on. That's the only way to get over your fears is to drive right into them. So I certainly want to encourage you to do that. All right, let's move on down to our look at some of the key terms today. When I go through the key terms, I will have my brief working definition on the screen for you. But I think it's important to kind of conceptualize and make sure that you're following along on your review sheet to make sure that you have everything that you need to be successful. So let's start off with the Iron Curtain. This is a pretty simple one. It's really just a term that was put forth by Winston Churchill to refer to the division of Europe into a mostly communist East or kind of run by the Soviet Union, and then a mostly democratic West, which was really being propagated by the United States. You could also look at it in economic terms as during the Cold War being communist East and capitalistic West for the most part. That's another way that you could think about it. Either way, if you know the basic premise, you should be in really good shape for the quiz tomorrow. Next, I decided to go Warsaw Pact first. Warsaw Pact, even though NATO happens first, in history, the Warsaw Pact, moving east to west, was an alliance system of the Soviet Union and, of course, some of its Eastern European allies like Hungary, in that range there, Romania, Bulgaria. All of the Eastern European countries were really involved in that Warsaw Pact. On the opposite end of that spectrum was NATO. NATO is very important today. You probably hear about it on the news every time that you turn it on. But it's an alliance system now. It's very similar to the Warsaw Pact, but this time it's made up of the United States, Canada, and Western European nations. It stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I think that's a giveaway because if you look at the North Atlantic region, you've got the United States, you've got Canada, and then that's where your Western European powers like France, Great Britain, so on and so forth are located. So that's a good way to remember that different alliance system. Okay, so when we're talking about Cold War, we're talking about a time period in which the direct fighting, like lining up on the battlefield between the Soviets and the United States, that really was non-existent. So that's why it's called a Cold War, because we're coming out of direct fighting from World War II, and now it's more propaganda, espionage or spies going around. So those are some of the things. But one of the implications or the terms that is used often during the Cold War is called brinkmanship. And as the term implies, this is a country's willingness to go all the way to the brink, which means kind of like the edge of war, but not yet totally into a full-fledged war. But not totally. I wrote that a little bit wrong. It should say, but not totally into a full-fledged war. And so thinking about brinkmanship, that'll take you into the Cold War. Really, when you think about the Cold War, it's kind of what I just talked about, but also it really lasted about 40 years, okay? From the 1950s, 1960s into the 1980s. It was a long standoff and conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States. That's really what we're looking at here. Those were the two major players in the Cold War. Coming out of World War II and kind of the predecessor to the Cold War, there was a peaceful negotiation called the United Nations. The United Nations was an international peacekeeping, it still is actually, was an international peacekeeping and defense system that was made up originally of about 50 nations. The goal was to be strategic, to use diplomacy to help create a peaceful situation coming out of a major world war like World War II. Back then, it started with 50 nations. Today, in the UN, there are close to 195 countries that are part of it. So that's something that's, like NATO, still a very important part of the world today. Next is the Marshall Plan. Remember, one of the big goals of the United States was to try and stop the spread of communism, but also help non-communist countries. So the Marshall Plan was an economic aid package designed by the United States to give Western European nations the money that they needed to rebuild after World War II. So we gave loans and also granted money to countries like France, even Germany, different parts of Germany, Great Britain, to help them, of course, rebuild and repair their war-torn land structures, buildings, cities, but also their war-torn economies too. Okay, this one's been really, really controversial throughout the last few days. So you can take Apollo 1 off. I've removed it from contention for the quiz. Basically, Apollo 1 was one of the first space shuttles, but it never really got off foot because it caught on fire and all three of the astronauts died. But they did name the spaceship Apollo 1. And so NASA continued to name all of the different space shuttles and spaceships after that fact, because they had, of course, perished, but they did name that one Apollo 1. And so it goes all the way to, into the teens and the Apollos. But nonetheless, it could be a distractor on the quiz, meaning it could be a possible answer, but it's not going to be an answer. So that's a pretty big giveaway to you as well. The U-2 incident. All right. So this was when a United States spy plane was shot down by the Soviet Union because of its presence being within the boundaries and of Soviet Union or Russia, and the pilot, Francis Gary Powers, was taken prisoner. So really a controversial event in the Cold War, and it involved a trade-off later. He was sentenced to 10 years in a Russian prison, but it involved a trade-off of a Russian spy that the United States had caught and Francis Gary Powers, and it was a trade-off between those two. Keeping with our terminology here of trying to stop the spread of communism, there's a term called containment. Containment is a United States policy with the goal of trying to limit the spread of communism to other countries. We know that this was a very key theme in most of our essential questions this week, which will be showing up on the short answer. And I do intend to talk about the short answer in a brief format tonight before we go into a question and answer session. Sputnik. All right. Sputnik was the first unmanned satellite put into orbit by the Soviet Union. Don't be confused by that. It was the first unmanned satellite put into orbit by any country. And this happens historically in 1957. Now, one very important factor from this is that when the Soviets put Sputnik up into orbit, the United States felt like they were very, very behind in education. So this is when we started the NASA program. This is when we started education in science. We really wanted to catch up to Russia in this type of space program. It was called the space race, and they were winning. And so then we had to play catch up. Next is the Yalta Conference. I started the chapter with a picture of this conference. If you remember, I had the slideshow up. The Yalta Conference was a meeting of the following leaders: Winston Churchill from Great Britain, FDR, also Franklin Delano Roosevelt, that's what that stands for, of the United States, and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union / Russia, to basically decide, hey, what are we going to do with Germany after World War II? How are we going to keep them under control? They decided to divide it up into sections, which were called zones of occupation. And the eastern part of those zones were going to be controlled by the Soviets. And the western part would, of course, be controlled by the US and also France and also Great Britain. So those are some of the key factors there. The Great Leap Forward is pretty big from Section 2 on China. Was probably the biggest part, but it was an attempt by Mao Zedong to create communes, which are these large collective farms where people live in these big dormitories. And communes were created to basically collectivize farming. Everybody works on the farms. All the food that the farms produce, they eat in the dormitory cafeterias. The goal was to try and feed like 25,000 people with the food produced on these collective farms. And then any wealth that was created from these communes would be distributed evenly, right? That's the kind of the big picture goal of communism. It was a huge failure. All in all, 20 million died due to the failure of the Great Leap Forward. So it's kind of a misnomer. Anytime you're thinking about the Great Leap Forward, you'll often see it in quotation marks because it really was a step backward, in essence, historically. We took a look at third world countries toward the end of the chapter. Third world countries are developing nations. They are countries that are usually independent and also usually very poor. There are still third world countries today, such as Haiti, Honduras. I think I had the Sudan, which is in Africa, on the list that I came up with, and also Nepal, which is just north of India. But third world countries are still developing. They're usually not industrialized, so they're a little bit behind some of the major powers. That's what you're talking about there. Okay, next are the non-aligned nations. So we know that there were the Soviets, and then there was the United States, and then they both had allies, right? Well, the non-aligned nations are these countries that were like, we don't really want to get involved in anything that has to do with the Cold War. So we're going to stay out of Cold War affairs. One of the biggest countries that was a non-aligned country was India. And India was very big population. They had started to industrialize, so they were probably the biggest non-aligned nation in the world at that time. Okay, now it gets a little bit more intense. There's an event in world history called the Bay of Pigs during the Cold War. This was actually a failed invasion of Cuba that was put together by the United States. What the United States did is took Cuban exiles, people who left Cuba that were anti-communist. When Fidel Castro turns Cuba into a communist country, they had fled the country, came to the United States. Well, the United States trained those Cuban exiles in an attempt to eventually invade and overthrow the communist dictator Fidel Castro. However, Castro's military defeated the U.S. Cuban exiles, and so this caused a major, major problem leading into our next term, which was called the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis came in the aftermath of the Bay of Pigs. Basically, what happens is when the Bay of Pigs fails for the United States The Cubans are worried about a future invasion, and so they turn to the Soviets for help. They're both communist nations, so they feel like they're on the same footing. And so the Soviets actually placed nuclear missiles on Cuba to be in very close range to the US. Essentially, you could say they were pointing or aiming their nuclear warheads at the United States, and they're just south of Florida, so it could have been catastrophic. Now, my banners that you see at the bottom, they only let me put 200 digits there, so I ran out of space. But it basically ended with this deal. I will tell you, the Cuban Missile Crisis ends with this deal. The United States will remove their nuclear weapons from Italy and Turkey, which are very close to Russia, and they will also agree that they're not going to invade Cuba. And if they agree to those three tenets, then the Soviets will remove their nuclear missiles from Cuba. And that's basically what happened. So it could have been very bad. There were a couple of very close calls, as we watched in a few of the videos that we looked at this week. But nonetheless, that's kind of how the Cuban Missile Crisis went down. Very tense moment in world history. Okay, next is de-Stalinization. A lot of questions came to me about de-Stalinization on our review day. It was in the reading in the first paragraph for section 5, which you as students were responsible for writing. But once Joseph Stalin dies, many of the Soviet leaders became much more moderate. Stalin was very strict, very rule with an iron fist. But the later leaders became more moderates, and they understood that Stalin, as a leader, had imprisoned or killed many of his own people. Millions we're talking about, okay? So de-Stalinization is the process of actually moving away from the policies and practices of Joseph Stalin. In fact, President named Nikita Khrushchev says, we want to eradicate Russia from any history involving Joseph Stalin. They actually went around and tore down all of his monuments in the Soviet Union and so on and so forth. So this was a big movement in Russia. Detente. This is a policy that came as the Cold War starts to fizzle down or thaw, as your book mentions. It's basically a policy put forth by the United States of lessening Cold War tensions. The root word of detente is a German word, but it's basically the United States making an attempt to deal with other nations in a more practical and flexible manner, which overall was supposed to reduce tension between the two entities. That was really the goal of detente. Next is the Star Wars program. It's kind of a funny situation because it really was made up more so than it was real, but it was a missile defense program that was meant to stop incoming missiles with satellites. Like, that was the goal, create satellites that could shoot down incoming missiles. It was the United States basically saying that we had this technology. President Ronald Reagan said that we had this technology. It's something that we were working on, but in reality, we're not exactly sure if we had it, that we could shoot down missiles. It's questionable if we could do that or not. The cool thing about it is that U.S. historians think it worked in kind of settling Russia down or scaring Russia from sending missiles possibly at us, because they thought if we could shoot down their missiles with a satellite, then what else could we do with those satellites? So, and Star Wars, the movie, was kind of out at that time too. So that's why it was kind of called that, and kind of historically relevant there as well. All right, a couple easy ones. 38th parallel is just the latitude line that divides North and South Korea. It's still in the same place today, okay? And that demilitarized zone in between North and South Korea, which I think you've probably, if you've watched the news in the last 5 years, you've probably seen a meeting between President Trump and the North Korean dictator that took place in that demilitarized zone, okay? So that is still there in the same exact spot. Next is the 17th parallel. Now, that's a little bit different. This one is referring to the divider line, latitude line between North and South Vietnam. Vietnam is now one nation, so there's no longer a divider line necessary there. Sticking with the Vietnam War, there was a movement called Vietnamization. This was the gradual withdrawal of U.S. troops from Vietnam, while also training at the same time, while we're gradually withdrawing from Vietnam, we were also training South Vietnamese troops to be able to hopefully fight the war on their own. So that's why it's called Vietnamization. It's because it was to try and get the South Vietnamese troops to be able to handle the situation on their own. Okay, that is the end of the terms. I do want to talk briefly here about the short answer. I'll tell you there's going to be 3 short answer questions. I'm going to give you some big time clues here about what those questions might be, and then we'll go into question and answer time. You can ask me anything you want. It could be, hopefully we'll start with questions that are history related, and then from there, if there's anything else that I can help you with about life or about whatever it is, you can feel free to ask me. I'll do my best. I'm not a certified counselor, but I'll do my best to help you out. But what's going to happen here is I'm going to, because I have that 200 digit limit, I'm going to have it scroll across the screen, which allows me to put more. So it'll keep going across the screen and then repeating. So we'll kind of go through those in that fashion. All right. So first thing, you want to focus on, why did the United States get involved in proxy and surrogate wars, such as the Korean War and Vietnam? I think you can come up with the answer, but the big picture thing that we focused on all week in this chapter is trying to stop the spread of communism. So really, when you're looking at that first short answer, what you really need to focus on is the idea that the United States gets involved in these wars for the biggest goal is to stop the spread of communism. That's what they really were trying to do. Okay, the second factor, which is going to scroll here in just a second, is I really want you to give a thorough study to the chart on page 983. And I'm going to share that chart with you here right now, because I want to tell you what you're going to need to know. There's quite a bit that you'll need to know. So let's go to the sharing, and I'll pull that page up from your Libro. Okay. I'm sorry, textbook. All right. This is the chart that I'm talking about. So not only does it have a map of key communist and Warsaw Pact countries, and then also non-aligned countries right here in the green. So the yellow or the orange are Warsaw Pact communist countries. The purple are countries involved in NATO. And then the light green are non-aligned entities in the Cold War. So you'll need to know that. And then since we said, the Cold War wasn't really a war that was fought between the Soviets and the United States in particular, there were some other things like foreign aid, like we would try to help other powers that were either communist or not. Espionage. Basically, these are spy planes, spies on the ground, things of that nature. Multinational alliances, NATO and Warsaw Pact is what we're really focusing on there. There were others, but those are the big ones. Propaganda was huge during the Cold War. Both superpowers used propaganda like radio broadcasts, even television shows that tried to make the enemy look really bad. We already talked about brinkmanship. Surrogate wars or proxy wars are wars that are supported by both sides, even though both sides don't have troops fighting in the war. They may have money and ammunition and weapons, just like what's going on in Ukraine. Just like what's going on in Ukraine today, where some of the world powers, including the United States, are helping Ukraine with money and with weapons. That's what was kind of going on during the Cold War. It's kind of eerily similar, what's going on right now in the world, to what was going on during the Cold War in the 50s and the 60s. So this is a really nice chapter to kind of bridge the past to the present, because if you're following the news, we know that all of these things, propaganda is going on right now. Foreign aid is going on right now. I'm sure there's some espionage going on. Alliances, NATO's not necessarily involved, but when you take a look at Russia, like Belarus is allowing them to come through to attack in certain spots. So you could consider that an alliance system. All right. There's one more page here This is page 984, and it basically shows some of the key things that happened during the Cold War, some of the major events in these different spots on this map. So that might also be very useful for you. Okay, I'm going to flip back, stop sharing the screen, and come back to normal here. Now, there's one more on the ticker. It's going to come on your screen here in just a second. It's basically going to be thinking about China and the policies and practices that Mao Zedong put into play. If you're in my 7th hour, you love Mao Zedong. He's one of your favorites. I don't know why. But one of the things that I would say is that when you look at the third question here, you want to think about the policies and practices. So not just thinking about he's got a funny name, but you need to think about the fact that he took away land from a lot of those large and wealthy landowners and then redistributed that land to the peasants. He actually did this. Like, if you are a landowner, you lost everything. And now you have to be on the even footing ground of the peasant. So a lot of those folks were really, really angry, and they were executed. 1 million landowners were killed for fighting against the Chinese government under Mao. So Mao's policies and practice were very communist, very socialist, but he also killed a lot of his own people, like Stalin. So there's a similarity between those two, very much so. Okay, I'm going to take off the short answer and this. Now we're going to go to question and answer session. So just give me a quick moment here. I'll go to the comments. First of all, I appreciate all of you for joining here on a Sunday night. I see we got some juniors in here. Hey, juniors, Jenner. I saw Jenner in there. Anybody who said hello, hey, hello to you as well. Thank you for joining. I really do appreciate you very much. And I hope that you do well on your quiz tomorrow. I'm sure there's quite a few people missing. You know, this will replay hopefully tonight. But from there, there's going to be a chance at probably the beginning of class to talk with me. I do have a key announcement, though. If you're in my second hour girls, you got to remember to show up at the cafeteria where the girls sophomores eat lunch. I think that's where they've put me, because my classroom is being taken over by the AP government. They're taking the AP government. I have the most desks in the school, so they need to use my room. And that's also for my seminar, and then that's also for my history by Hollywood, but none of those ballers are on this here tonight. Okay, we got a question here. Emma says, for the second short answer possibility, do you want us to say one thing from each box and different color countries? I don't think you need to memorize it to like that level, but think big picture. Like, if the question says like what countries were involved in NATO and what countries were involved in the Warsaw Pact, then that might be a helpful scheme. I don't think that's going to be the question. I usually don't ask to be that specific on the content part. So I think you should focus on the boxes to give you a clue. And with those boxes, I really think what's important is to focus on some of the strategies of the Cold War that were not necessarily hand-to-hand combat or combat with weapons. I think that's really the important ideology there that I would like you to have down pat. Good question, Emma. All right, let's see here. We're going right down the list. Format for the quiz. I went over on, of course, review day, but the format is going to be about 35 questions. There's going to be multiple choice, a few multiple choice. There's going to be true and false, like about 5. Well, there'll be about 8 to 10 multiple choice, 5 true and false, and then the rest are matching. And then you're going to have 3 short answers. So that's what you're up against right there. Well, what I just kind of said there, Ashton, the different forms that would and ways that the Cold War was fought. I had on the ticker exactly, what you really want to know there. FDR is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the United States president during the Great Depression. He came up with the New Deal, which were government programs to put people back to work and start to drive the economy forward in a long way. But then he also was president during World War II and then the start of the Cold War. So he was at the Yalta Conference representing the United States. Winston Churchill is the Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II, and then also was at the Yalta Conference, like I had that picture up at the very beginning of the chapter. So those are some of the things that you're going to really know. And then also I mentioned him with naming the Iron Curtain tonight in my explanation there. Yes, Gabby, Kim Il-sung is a family member of a lot of the leaders that are still in relationship today. He was one of the first communist dictators of North Korea, sort of started off that nuclear missile weapons program. So that's something that you really want to know about Kim Il-sung. Heath, one of my favorite parents right there. Can I repeat the practices of Mao Zedong for the third short answer? I would say yes. The practices of Mao would include very communistic, very strict communistic state. One of the things that you really want to know about Mao is that he took away land from the big time landowners and then redistributed it to the peasants. But he was all about trying to get the support of the peasant class. So one of the things that got to take into consideration there is that when you're thinking about Mao, strict communism, even distribution of wealth, collective farming, communes, right? The Great Leap Forward, and then killing anybody who really tried to speak out or fight against his government system. Love the physique in that picture there, by the way. Sign of strength. All right, let's go to Nicholas. Which guy had the double names? All right, the double names is going to be Yang Yishi. So 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth on your sheet in the key terms. Yang Yishi was also known as Chiang Kai-shek. He was the key leader of course, the nationalists in China. So he wasn't on the communist side. He was fighting against Mao. So he was the leader of the nationalists. Yes, former student and key baller master Nick Gisha, giving you guys a good luck shout out. Be ready to ball out of control. That's what we say in the realm. So we want to ball out of control on tomorrow's quiz. Thanks, Mr. Gisha, for joining us and cheering on these wonderful students here. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Great coach, too, by the way. Master Gish is becoming a wonderful young coach on the track and field staff. His girls are really running well. They're balling out of control. All right, I'm here for any questions or comments, anything that you need, anything that I can help you with. Of course, I am here for you. Got a little bit more time tonight. So anything that you need help with, go ahead and feel free to ask. Hopefully you had a great weekend. One of my former students, Josh Ross, signed with the Baltimore Ravens. I also coached him as a linebacker at St. Mary's, so I was pretty excited to see that. Kira says, can you go over MacArthur, please? Yes. We're talking about General Douglas MacArthur. He's the same MacArthur. Oh, Dominic had the same question. That's good. We're going to hit both of you. We'll get both of them done. So MacArthur is the same general that used the island hopping strategy in World War II in the Pacific. So General MacArthur actually headed the UN's military forces, the United Nations military forces, against North Korea. And he was doing a pretty good job. But when China got involved to help North Korea, he called for the nuclear bomb to be dropped on North Korea and China. And so, whoa, I mean, he got fired and replaced for that. So That's you don't need to know who fired him or who replaced him, but what's most important is that he called for that nuclear bomb to be dropped. All right, we got a track question. Gabby, we are getting out. Track girls only are getting out after 7th hour. That is not for the boys. The boys are home. The girls were traveling by bus to University Liggett. So we're going to get out after 7th hour, hustle over to the field house, get yourself changed into your uniform and your sweats. And then we should be loading up the bus for our jamboree meet against all of the Catholic League schools. Other questions, guys and gals, getting ready for this last quiz of the year. I'm just going to wait. I hope, does anybody have any results on the regatta? I know we had a crew regatta at Kensington. Wonder what was going on there. Hopefully we did pretty well. Justin says, is there a matching for? Yeah, some of the key figures will be in the matching. There's not just one section of key figure matching, but yeah, they're going to be involved in there. Yeah, for sure. Ho Chi Minh, sure. Communist leader of the Northern Vietnamese. So in the Vietnam War, it was basically North Vietnam with help from Soviets and China, and with help from the Viet Cong, like I taught you, doing their work down in South Vietnam. So you've got those entities working with Ho Chi Minh. John, will I do something similar to this for AP stuff? I did do them last year. So like units 1, 2, and 3 are already up and available for you. I think what I'm going to let happen is Heimler and Freemanpedia and anti-social studies, they already have everything kind of broken down for you in videos, and they're going to be doing live reviews. So I don't think I'm going to be doing live reviews for those unless you really want me to. But what I would really focus on my live reviews is like how to write the DBQ, how to write the LEQ, how to write the SAQs. I plan to do some of that in class. So I haven't prepared for it really, but I mean, I could. So I think that that's something that we could take a look at, but nothing really content wise, except for the ones that I did last year. Crew team balled out. Excellent. Balling out of control across the board there. Facts, straight facts. That's excellent. Okay. We have Zammers, were you not paying attention? Gabby just asked this question, and she's your friend, and I answered it. Kim Il-sung was the North Korean communist dictator, starting off the nuclear program, so on and so forth. All right, I'm waiting for any other questions. And I'm not picking on you, P. I'm totally cool with answers. I'm just joking with you. Okay, anybody else that has a question or comment? Oh, for sure, Kirkulator. It's Master Kirk. It's going to be a sad day. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to miss all of you. I really enjoy teaching. I'll miss doing this. This takes me a lot of time to put these together, but I think they're really worth it. So I hope that they've been beneficial for you. But yeah, the realm is a special place. But you got to remember, when you come to the realm, you're a part of a family. So you can always come back to the realm, and you can always contact me, and I'll be there for you, no doubt about it. If you're not following me on the Instagram, go ahead and follow if you want. I'll accept it. I know that I took some people off, but I'm fine with it. I want to be there for you, and I know that I'll be posting some live reviews and some notes about the AP exam. So if you want to join me there, then that's where I'll be posting it on my main account. I don't do anything with history on my track account. So definitely. Hunter, we started Zero Dark 30. So I think you missed the first day. Tomorrow we're going to be in the cafeteria. So unfortunately, we won't be able to watch it. We're going to have kind of a study hall because I'm getting kicked out of the realm tomorrow. They should never be able to kick me out of the realm, but I should have protested. I should have sat down in the parking lot, but I figured it'd be okay just one day. All right, Tammy. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night. Study up. Other questions or comments? I'm here for you. I'll stay on for about another 4 minutes, and if things heat up, I'll stay a little longer if I need to, but I'm good to go. I don't know if you guys saw, but I got to talk to Josh Ross the other day. He met me after track practice, so we were talking for a while, and it's kind of nice to see your former students who really are doing big things, but also keeping themselves humble. One of his big questions was, how's it going with the girls and boys school? How does that work? Because alumni, they don't understand. They never went through this if they're a little bit older. So, I'm always very positive about, of course, the girls division, and I think things are going really well, and hopefully the same sentiment is shared from the boys division. I think the boys division has been spectacular this year in my classes. Just wonderful. My 5th and 6th hour are really, really strong, very strong students. And I'm hoping for some really good results on the AP exam. Yeah, we're having some thank you messages. I really appreciate all of you. I guess I'll go into my final comments. I'll say my final advice, make sure you read through your outlines. Make sure that you're getting yourself ready for this quiz. You don't want to go out on a bad note. Let's go out by balling out of control, like Mr. Gisha said, keeping with the realm and the AP World History approved terms. So one of the things that I would say is make sure that you're studying your outlines. Make sure you study your review sheet. Look at those charts and graphs. Go through the text pages that are important. And then, of course, make sure that you say thank you to your parents, right? That's a really important theme. I know today, I think the girls had a mother-daughter brunch. So that's kind of a nice event. So make sure that you're saying thank you to the people that are there for you and that do so much for you, and say your prayers properly. Do the right thing, though, too. Guys and gals, make sure you're doing the right thing. I always say you can make 1,000,000 or 10,000 or 1,000 or 100 good decisions. It only takes one bad decision to ruin your whole life. It really does. It only takes one bad decision to ruin your whole life. So be cognizant of that as you go throughout your day. I'm not trying to scare you. I just think it's good advice. I think you should keep that in your mind when you're practicing metacognition, when you're thinking about what you're thinking about, when you're making those actions and decisions. It's very important. All right. I love all of you. I want to wish you a great night. I'll see you tomorrow for the quiz. And then after that, it's time to really get ready for that AP exam. I hope that you're partitioning out your time to get ready to ball out of control on the one that really matters, which is that AP exam. You're welcome, Master Jack. And you're welcome, everyone who said thank you and who was here. Have a wonderful night, and we will see you tomorrow on the rebound.